Hi, everybody. This is Jay Faulkner. I'm here to just tell you about a little bit of a security issue we had in Ironic recently and walk you through the implications and how to mitigate it. We have an internal identifier of this of OSSA 2024-003 that essentially means it's the third OpenStack security advisory in the year 2024. And we also had a CVE number assigned for tracking 2024-44082. And this is related to unvalidated image data being passed to QEMU image. And we'll talk about in a second why that's problematic. But first and foremost, you need to patch. We have patches available. These are our supported branches. In our supported branches of Ironic Python agent, we have patches available. If you're using Metal Cubed, you have patches available. Look in the GitHub security advisory for that one so that you can make sure to find the updated versions of all the packages that you might need for this. But we do have some branches that are unmaintained. In OpenStack parlance, when we say that something is unmaintained, what that means is that we're not making you any promises about it anymore. We promise you for 18 months, we're going to support something really well. We're going to make sure it has security updates. We're going to test it really well. For the unmaintained bits, this is a best effort type of path. And so you sort of can see this emerging in the way this security process went. For the Ironic Python agent, through multiple hours of testing and attempts, I wasn't able to get a version of this Ironic Python agent patch made that didn't seriously concern myself and the other core reviewers about the potential of regressions. So we decided for safety purposes not to release an IPA fix, but that's not a problem because we did put a release out for Ironic unmaintained branches, the Zed, Yoga, Xena, Wallaby, and Victoria release. And an option inside there which says for the conductor to download and inspect all images before we send them off to the agent, so that it's okay that the agent was not patched in that case. A little bit of an alert though, if you installed the first version of this patch or you installed the version of the unmaintained patch we sent out to the list and have linked in the OSSA, we actually found a regression in that patch in a rare configuration. If you're using a configuration where you have force raw images set to false and you're not expecting those images to be converted, if you just are running our initial version of this patch, those images are going to be converted unconditionally. And this was just a mistake, sort of one of the things that can sometimes happen when you're backporting things back years and years back into the past. But we have followed up on this. We have fixed it. We found the issue, reproduced it, fixed it up, and we merged in those fixes. I'll have the link down in the description. In fact, any links I'm talking about here, I'll make sure are down in the YouTube description. But if you're familiar with Garrett, you can search for the hashtag OSSA-2024-003-follow-up, and that will reveal to you the patches that are right on top of it. It's just a couple of lines, so it should be pretty easy to put in, even if you have a custom patched version downstream. But let's talk about the bug. Let's talk about what we actually had to fix here. And for that, we'll start out with a little bit of context. QEMU image is a utility used for evaluating and converting images. It's brought to us by the QEMU project, the emulation program that powers a lot of things. In fact, even if you're using like a KVM hypervisor, that's all being piped through QEMU. So it's a very common application in the cloud space. But what we discovered is that running QEMU image on a bad image can cause bad behavior. And there's really a long list of these things, but two of the things to hit on is denial of service due to excessive CPU or RAM usage, data extraction from the machine running QEMU image. And this is basically because QEMU evaluates those images using the actual image drivers that it would use if it was booting a VM. So that actually means there's another step that made our edition of this vulnerability even worse, which is that if you don't specify a source type, if you just tell QEMU image to convert an image and you give it an output and you sort of let it figure out what image type you're using, well, that means that it's going to cycle through all those drivers. And so that means that you could put an exploit that normally would only impact one type of image into another image type and make it even more obfuscated, more difficult for a scanner to catch, or maybe to bypass some sort of earlier filtering. So what this leads us to say is that all images passing through QEMU image must be safety checked first. We cannot pass any untrusted data to that. So what happened is OpenStack developers, and I can't take credit for this. This was all code written by other developers in the OpenStack community. I'm very grateful to them for that. They were an image format inspector. This helps detect the type of an image, and it ensures that image doesn't contain anything dangerous. And so now, if you're running a patched ironic or patched IPA, anytime we're going to call QEMU image convert, we're going to run a safety check against that image, and we're going to explicitly pass an image type to all calls to QEMU image. In addition, we've made sure that in IPA, if you're sending a raw image to Ironic Python agent, we're not even using QEMU image anymore at all in all cases. We're just DDing that data directly to the disk and not even using the tool at all. So depending on your configuration, that image conversion could happen in Ironic or it could happen in IPA. So what this means is that you really have to patch both halves for it to be safe, unless you set conductor always validates images to true. And what this will do is, even if you're configured in such a way for, you had an HTTP URL set for your image, normally the conductor would just pass that URL straight through to the agent. If you have conductor always validates images set to true, it's going to download that image and perform a safety check before it sends it on to the agent. And so that's sort of your release valve if you're not in a situation where you can patch the Ironic Python agent. And just to be as clear as possible, you must patch your IPA RAM disk and your Ironic service, or patch your Ironic service and set conductor always validates images to true. But we'll talk about there's some downsides if you don't patch IPA. So I strongly recommend you patch them both. But if this all sounds kind of familiar, it's because it is. I mentioned at the top that this was the third OpenStack security advisory that we've had happen this year. The first two were right along these lines as well. The first one was against Cinder, Glance, and Nova, arbitrary file access through custom QEMU data. And OSSA 2024-003 was an incomplete file access fix and regression as kind of a follow-up to that first one. These are very similar to the issue we just fixed in Ironic. And in fact, I want to thank the developers who worked on this. And in fact, Julia Krieger, who's a longtime Ironic core Red Hat employee, Dan Smith, a longtime OpenStack contributor, primarily focusing on Nova, more integrated stuff, also a Red Hat employee. They both co-discovered this vulnerability. Dan brought in the knowledge of QEMU, and Julie and I brought in the knowledge of Ironic. So I really want to thank the other members of the OpenStack community who sort of helped us unearth this and provide us with a lot of the tools we needed to fix this. So again, what are your actions as a user if you've not patched yet? Well, first of all, you can mitigate this depending on how you're set up with Ironic. You can make sure that Ironic doesn't get any untrusted images if you can't patch it. You can do that by disallowing arbitrary use of images in your Ironic installation. If you have something set up where you have an integrated OpenStack installation with Glance and Nova and such, you can potentially just not allow users to upload images to Glance anymore and make sure they don't have the ability to deploy directly. And you've effectively mitigated this vulnerability, assuming someone hasn't already put a bad image into your Glance. But that's not the route we want to go. We've got a fix for you. So go ahead and patch that IPA RAM disk and Ironic servers. The other thing that's very important to do is in your configuration, there's a Pixie instance master path, and you're going to want to clear that out during the upgrade process. Just while you're doing the upgrade, make sure that gets cleared out, because what will happen is any bad images will stay in cache. And what we actually found, and this actually happened with the Unmaintained patch, it's part of the reason we didn't find the issue, is that if you don't clear out that image cache, it can cover up issues. So for instance, let's say your image has something in it that we're detecting as unsafe, and you release this fix and you don't purge your image cache, it's not going to break the time you start back up Ironic. It's going to break when that image is tried to be cached again after it expires from cache, which might be sometime at 4 a.m. when you're trying to get some sleep and you don't want to get a call from your broken OpenStack server. So make sure that you clear out that image cache. So a couple of other concerns, other changes we had to do as a part of this. Ironic and IPA are now enforcing an allow list of image formats that we permit for use. This allow list includes QCal2, the QEMU copy on write image type, raw images, which raw images are essentially just the exact bits you would put on the disk except for in a file, and an ISO format where We support ISOs for use for booting up in RAM disk and things like that. So we have to allow that as a format by default as well. If you're using a different image type, first of all, I don't really recommend it. We don't test against other image types, and there's not really a great reason to use something other than a QCal2, a RAW, or an ISO image on bare metal hardware. But if you're using it and that's not something you can change, we did put in a config here, conductor permitted image formats, that you can go ahead and set your list of permitted image formats. Note that it's not additive. We're just talking about the defaults when we say QCal2, RAW, and ISO. So if you just want to add one, you will have to repeat our 3 defaults and then add your own to the end. And just a note, the image type that we're looking at, it doesn't matter what the extension is. It doesn't even matter what QEMU image thinks it is. It's about what our image inspector is saying it is. And so, doesn't matter what the name of your file is, anything like that. We're going to judge it based on the contents. Another concern is around performance. So first of all, if you apply both patches, as I've recommended, to both Ironic and the IPA RAM disk, you're not going to see any performance changes at all. These image checks are literally taking milliseconds. They're not very intense at all. So don't worry about that. However, if you've decided to make the trade-off, or you're running one of those unmaintained branches where we don't have a patch for Ironic Python agent, you have to set conductor always validates images to true. Well, just simply based on my description of how that works, you might can see how it can increase network traffic to your conductors. Because if you have image download source set to something where normally the conductor wouldn't even have to download the image at all, if you set this setting, it's obviously going to have to download the image and be able to safety check it. And that might change the semantics of how it scales on your network. So just be warned and take this as an urging from me to go ahead and, as quickly as you can, get on a fully supported release of Ironic and make sure that you patch your IPA with the things we've provided you. Other concerns are, I've operated production clouds before, and that often included like bespoke image logic of our own to manage things. And while internal attacks are not nearly as big and scary as having a public API where someone could upload an untrusted image, you should just have some awareness of this, because you might have local tooling that uses QEMU image. If you do, then you too need to make sure that the images that you're passing to that are trusted. If you are uncomfortable with that, if you're not sure what's going on, or even maybe based on my warning in the previous slides, if you want to make sure that we're detecting your image type the way you expect, I've made a little bit of a tool here. That image format checker that was made in OpenStack, we've now put that into a library. The Ironic patches aren't using that yet, but it will very soon. We're going to migrate into that. But what I did was I wrote a very, very thin CLI wrapper around that library, which allows you to run it against an image on your local disk, and it'll return to you whether or not our library thinks it's safe, what the version is, what it thinks the size is. Pretty much most of the information we can get from that image format inspector today, I'm printing out there. And I'm just going to say that's not meant to be like a maintained piece of software. I'm not going to upload it to PyPI or anything like that, but it can serve as a example or a migration tool if this is a need that you have. So I want to thank you for watching here. It's a privilege to be able to give these messages to you straight up. And I want to thank G Research Open Source Software for enabling me to do content creation here and to bring these messages directly to you. If you are curious about more Ironic content, about more open source content, we're going to have some videos right down below at the end screen that you can click on, subscribe to the channel. You can subscribe to our podcast, the Gross Out podcast, where we don't really try to cover up the dirtiness of running open source. Things go bad. We wrote a regression for the unmaintained branch. That's embarrassing. That's a gross moment in open source, but only by saying out loud that we messed up and telling people how to get out. That's how it happens to all of us. So go ahead and listen to that. Find some more gross moments in open source and check out our content about OpenStack, Ironic, CNCF projects like Armada and such. But for now, I'm Jay Faulkner. Thank you very much for watching. And hopefully I'll see you next time with a better topic than a security bug. Thanks, everybody.